Good morning. The program is Stolen Property. I'm the Spirit Man, and I'll be with you until the top of the noon hour. We're looking to put power into 1 hour as we move to rock your raggedy radio this morning. So we thank the Creator for blessing us with this opportunity to be here, that maybe we can say something that you can take into your considerations this morning. So we hope that you are all well and you're enjoying this day, that we have the opportunity to do something constructive and productive this morning, instead of just being complacent and just taking things as they come. So we are happy to be here this morning. So I have a guest with me this morning. We have attorney Mike Nevin. Scott, I don't know why I said Mike, you know what I mean? But we have attorney Scott Nevin from the law offices of Peter T. Nichols, attorneys at law. And as we move further in this program, Brother Scott is going to give his information that you'll be able to get in contact with the law offices, because we're dealing with the issue of lead poisoning here in Baltimore City in particular. This has been a long standing issue of lead paint here in Baltimore City. A lot of us are familiar with it, for at least a year. I know I've been hinting and talking about this issue of lead poisoning. We would say, I used to say, and I stopped saying it, used to say, they are borderline retards, Riri, as the young folks say. But as you deal with folks who have challenges, folks that have special needs, and you at some point you just stop saying that, because you see that those folks are really just not special need individuals or people or children, and we look at ourselves as those who are supposed to be normal. And it may come out to be in certain situations that we are the special need persons, because what is happening with this issue of lead poisoning has affected so many people and so many generations of children here in Baltimore City. So, Scott, I thank you for being with us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, sir. Go ahead, Scott.
Lead, as you indicated, lead paint has been a major problem in Baltimore City for years because of the old housing stock.
Yes.
Many of the houses date back to the late 1800s. Lead paint was sold by manufacturers as considered to be the most durable paint at the time, and it also provided a very bright colors. So it was commonly used, and at the same time that they were selling it to people in Baltimore City and elsewhere throughout the country, the companies were also advertising that there was lead-safe paint.
Mm-hmm.
There were individuals all over the world actually studying the hazards associated with lead paint, and that because once it breaks down, young children who are most susceptible for ingesting it, you don't just have to eat it, but
Yes.
it can be just on dust and hand-to-mouth activity, or putting the toys in their mouth, and it gets inside of them. In the 50s and 60s, there were even children dying as a result of having really high lead levels. But Baltimore City has been ahead of the game compared to other major cities, with the health department and with Kennedy Krieger Institute, and they passed laws locally that banning the use of lead paint in the 1950s in Baltimore City. You could get it elsewhere and use it elsewhere, and then the federal government didn't ban it until 1979. But it has been a problem, and it's not illegal to have lead in the house, but what the city council did years and years ago was put it upon the landlords who are renting properties and the owners and operators that the surface paint, the paint that's on there
Yes.
now, is kept free of flaking and chipping paint, because that's what exposes the underlayers, the layers that are applied in the 30s and 40s and 50s. So as long as it's tight and it's smooth, then it's less likely for a child to be exposed.
Let me ask this question. What brought your law firm into this situation of lead paint?
Okay. I've actually been handling lead paint cases for about 19 years now. I've been with the law offices of Peter Nickel for 12 years. It's just something that I feel that young children in Baltimore City don't have someone necessarily speaking up for them. They are suffering the subtle brain damage as a result of the exposure, and I can get into that more a little bit. And it just seems to be the right thing to do, to have someone, and there are several lawyers that handle these kinds of cases, to keep the landlords responsible. There are laws out there, there are regulations that are supposed to be followed, and it's when they don't that children get exposed.
This question I have to ask you, looking at the demographics or possibly the cases that you have handled, did you find or possibly even look to see if these cases, these lead paint poisoning cases, came from Pacific zip codes or specific neighborhoods, or
there are general neighborhoods. I can't recite the zip codes right now, but certainly East Baltimore, around where the Hopkins facility is, all around there, Broadway, those streets out North Patterson Park Avenue, things like that, where you have the really older homes. And also West Baltimore, out the Route 40 expressway and things like that. But and generally there have been studies of various cities, and they look at the zip codes, and pretty much most of the zip codes in Baltimore City, there's a risk, and you have to be aware of it. I mean, I'm familiar with a case where a doctor came from New England with his family to start at Johns Hopkins, and they had a nice home in Guilford, and they wanted to put in central air conditioning, and a company came in and just started ripping down ceilings and walls to put in the venting and stuff, and their young children got poisoned because it generated all that dust, it brought up all the lead, and the kids had pretty high elevated lead levels for a while. It's not your normal circumstance, but so any old home, you need to be cautious. I mean, I even lived in a house in Baltimore County that had a 70-year-old first floor, but it was a new floor on the tops. The owner before me added onto it, and there was lead on the first floor. But you just, again, being aware of it, keeping it in good condition, and and making sure that the young children aren't picking at it or playing on it.
Okay, now my question is that bringing it on up to the now, we have had numerous articles over the years, and we're dealing with this issue of lead poisoning. The question I have to ask you is that with what's happening now, why is it that the city, the government, Baltimore City government, is refusing to pay the settlements that have already been rendered?
Okay. Well, the first thing to point out, which is very important, there are numerous cases against the Housing Authority of Baltimore City. It carries the Baltimore City name.
Yes.
The Housing Authority of Baltimore City is not a Baltimore City agency. It is an independent, or what they call quasi-governmental agency. It was created by statute. It was mandated, obviously, to provide low-income housing, but primarily its funding is from the federal government. So I don't believe that they consider themselves city employees, although they are employees of the Housing Authority of Baltimore City. The executive director of the Housing Authority is appointed by the mayor, but that's really the only direct connection that the city has with the Housing Authority of Baltimore City. So in that appointment, which is also approved by the city council, they do have some direction that they can certainly ask Mr. Graziano to take with regards to the Housing Authority not paying their judgments. The other thing that's unique about the Housing Authority is in that they were created by statute, and that they were mandated to have liability coverage for any type of liability. Or the other option that's in the statute is that they can raise their own funds. They should self-insure. That's different than most kinds of agencies that you would find in a government. So as a result of lead poisoning, the insurance industry stopped writing coverage in the late 80s and early 90s, and certainly by late 90s. It was next to impossible for a landlord to obtain liability
Insurance.
coverage also for lead poisoning. And the Housing Authority was aware of that because they had been sued numerous times. And in 1997, their insurance coverage ran out. But rather than doing what any other business you would think Motto would do and plan for the continuation of lead paint lawsuits and plan for budgeting for both defense costs as well as having to pay liabilities if a plaintiff, if an injured party is successful, they just ignored it totally. And they just stopped everything. They stopped negotiating settlements. They stopped paying judgments. And they also didn't budget for that possibility. Now, as Mr. Graziano told the City Council May 31st, that they've budgeted for defense costs. They keep that in mind, but they don't budget. They didn't. He made no mention of even thinking of budgeting for the ultimate liabilities. So, how do they get to do that? They don't, because actually they are just thumbing their noses at the law, the Housing Authority of Baltimore City, because a judgment is a court order.
That's right.
And any other person or business in the Baltimore City who would have a judgment against them, you have to pay it.
That's right.
Or you end up having to file bankruptcy, or it puts people in financial hardships. It affects their credit if you have a judgment on your record. But the Housing Authority just feels that they don't have to pay their obligations. Now, another thing as a business entity is that they are required to provide annual reports. And they pay a lot of money for an accounting firm to drum up a annual report. And a couple things are interesting, is that one, they've indicated that lead paint poisoning claims will not substantially affect their economic outcome. And they also don't report the judgments, which they now have they've reported $12 million collectively.
Yes.
They don't report them as liabilities.
But that is a liability.
Of course it's a
because
liability.
Because it's a debt you just have incurred.
It's a debt. And it's a debt that is there and that they have not paid yet, and that would be considered a liability.
Let me ask you this question.
Sure.
The Baltimore City Housing Commissioner, does he receive two checks, one from the city and one from the federal government?
You asked me that.
You
asked me that if I know it personally. I don't know. I've read it. He does hold two positions, Mr. Paul Graziano. He's the executive director of the Housing Authority of Baltimore City. He's also the commissioner of the Department of Housing and Community Development. And it's been reported that he gets two incomes, and they reported the total over $200,000.
Yes, but most folks don't have that knowledge of that.
No, I understand that.
So what we're looking at now, this situation here, besides let's go into the really, really interesting stuff as far as what happened at the lab at the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene of the straightening of the records and also deletion of the electronic files.
Okay. Now, that's a completely different issue,
Yes.
as you know. What happened there is that it's a product of a variety of things. One, unfortunately, there's still a lot of children out there who have had a history of lead paint poisoning. And I say a history because a child has up until before they turn 21 to file a lawsuit. So sometimes folks come into our office, their children may be 17, 18, 19 years of age, didn't know they could even file a claim or investigate a claim. And we do, and we send out record requests.
Yes.
And I've been doing that for over 19 years, and other people have been doing it longer. The Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, all this time, has always maintained those records because either the clinics were required, the health clinics would be required if they tested a child and it came out positive, they were required to send a copy of the lab result to the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. And for a long period of time, if they would draw the blood in the clinic, they would send it to the state lab. They would run the test, do the confirmation, keep the information, and also send it back, a copy back to the clinic. So they've been maintaining these records all along. Unfortunately, though, the volume of these requests is a lot. And the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene is never charged for the service. And what we would do is when a client comes in, we write a letter to the Department of Health lab requesting a copy of the records. We provide a signed HIPAA authorization from the client. And in a reasonable period of time, they would send us a response. Most of the time, they say, here are your records. And that was very helpful because it would not only show the blood lead levels, but it also was showing where the child, where they reported the child was living at the time. And residence history is important in proving because that's where your primary source of exposure is the home. So, all along it's been going fine. And quite often we would write to the clinics, and some of the clinics have closed, some of the clinics have lost records, a variety of things, but we could always rely on the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene of having those records. From reading, there's been an investigation since this came out a couple months ago. The director of the lab at the time was just inundated with a lot of requests. He was having staffing issues and had requests for more staff to be able to accommodate the requests, and felt that he unfortunately made a decision that the best way to handle this situation would be to just get rid of the records, and if you don't have the records, then you don't have to respond to the requests.
Correct.
There's a lot of problems with that. One of them being that there's always was a backload of both written requests as well as subpoenas. So here he is sitting on subpoenaed requests for documents, and rather than complying, he got rid of the records, and that's pretty questionable. And that was bad judgment, I feel, on my part. But it appears, based the Secretary of Health, Dr. Sharfstein, immediately stopped the process. He requested the Inspector General to conduct an investigation. They did, and they just issued a report about a week ago.
I didn't get to read that report yet.
Did you get it, though? I mailed it to you.
I know.
Okay, all right.
I'm receiving it as of now.
Okay, great. And and basically, it appears it was just primarily the decision of two individuals in the lab that this was their way to handle it. They had been told by other employees they didn't think that was a good idea. They did seek the advice of the Assistant Attorney General assigned to the lab, but I feel primarily they didn't give her all the information.
Okay, that's right.
And so, maybe the advice wasn't complete. But so it's very unfortunate because not only did they destroy the actual hard physical documents, but then they went into their computer bases and started deleting that as well. So, but fortunately, Dr. Sharfstein has been incredibly helpful and responsive to our concerns. Because what had happened is, being the head of the lead department in our office, I get all the mail, and I saw a large number of letters in February of this year saying they didn't have any records. We would get that once in a while. Sometimes a client was mistaken or they weren't really sure if they had lead poisoning many years ago. But this was, I got 20 on a day one time. And so I asked my staff to inquire, and then I ended up talking directly to Dr. DuBois, who was the lab director at the time, and that's when we had learned. And then I had communicated with other counsel that handles lead paint cases, and then we immediately reacted and said, what's going on? But Dr. Sharfstein was, from that day on, he was totally... I think he had just started in the position a month before, but he took immediate action, and I really appreciated his efforts. And what they were able to do is, like most businesses with computer databases, they had backups.
That's right.
And he dedicated his staff, and I know they spent a lot of hours working on the backups, the computer information, and it's our and he's met with us a couple of times. It's our understanding that they've been able to restore most of the information.
Because of what I read, that these files were destroyed with foreknowledge that the information was something that the attorneys that was representing the plaintiffs, those youth or children, dealing with their particular cases, the ramifications of what took place. I mean, if these files were not able to be retrieved, then there would be a really big mess.
Oh, absolutely, because a lot of it, that was the only line of proof we can't just file a claim on some of a personal injury on somebody's word. We require to have medical proof that a child had lead levels and what they were. And without that, like I said, some clinics aren't around anymore, and we can't get that information. The Department of Health and Mental Hygiene records were crucial. And I don't doubt that in some circumstances there will be people who come into our office and we're not going to be able to help them because their records don't exist anymore.
That's a tragic situation because so many people have been damaged over the such a long decades,
yeah, sure.
and with of that. Maybe you think I might be a lead paint baby.
Well, if you're raised in Baltimore City, there's a good chance that you had some level of lead.
And some one time in my life, I did live in public housing too.
There you go.
So some folks may agree with what I said, but that's something else. But
not all public housing had lead paint in it either.
Yes.
But we're finding out that many of the projects and high rises, which fortunately have now been demolished, torn down. But they were built in the 50s, and primarily they weren't supposed to be painted with lead paint. But I know that they in fact do have lead paint, and that's been unfortunate.
Well, what we're going to do right now is we're going to take a break, and we're going to get right back into this. And the phone number is 410-761-1592. If you have any phone calls with Scott, we'll take your phone call this morning. If you have a child that you believe that is suffering from lead paint because it's so pervasive here in Baltimore City, and if you live in West Baltimore, East Baltimore, Northwest Baltimore, if you live in what they say, what is the hood or the neighborhood, we know, and just from folks who are at least 50 or over, that folks, they grew up in these neighborhoods and communities, and they don't move too far away. Right. Particularly if you're in West Baltimore, Northwest Baltimore, East Baltimore, where these neighborhoods are transit in the sense where you have a lot of rental properties. Folks do not go any place. I could go over on the east side of Baltimore and the west side of Baltimore, and I could go back 3-4 generations of people who never left that particular area. Some may have moved around the corner. Some may have moved 2-3 blocks away, but they never left the vicinity in which they reside. So it could be a generational issue of lead poisoning within Baltimore City. So we're going to take this break, and we'll be back, okay?
Okay.
$15.90 WFBR, Glen Burnie, Baltimore. $15.90 WFBR, Glen Burnie, Baltimore. Views expressed on the following program do not necessarily reflect those of the Way Broadcasting Corporation or the staff and management of WFBR.
Good morning. The program is Stolen Property. I'm Brother Donald, the Spirit Man, and we'll be with you until the top of the noon hour. I have attorney Scott Nevin with me this morning from the law offices of Peter T. Nichols. I mean, everyone knows the law offices of Peter T. Nichols. You have seen it on television so many times. So, the law offices of Peter T. Nichols, lead paint, personal injury, and asbestos. Phone number is 422-7005. Toll free 1-800-303-4930. Did I have it backwards?
Yeah, 244.
I told you I might be a lead paint. Might be a lead paint baby. Might be a lead paint baby after all.
7005.
So Scott, what we're going to do right now is take a couple phone calls.
Okay.
We're going to take a couple phone calls. Good morning. You on the air?
Yeah, my name is Nehemiah.
Hey, Nehemiah.
Question I have, and I appreciate what you're doing for the show, is I heard about the lead painting on the news, files being taken away or thrown away, and then it just went right by me. But I wanted to say that, what about, ask the attorney here, what does he think about the lead that was in the teeth of young people like me who grew up? I have more than 10 fillings in my mouth, and it has lead, and it has also mercury in it.
Yeah, what we're dealing with, Nehemiah, is basically lead poisoning within Baltimore City, within the residents in Baltimore City. That is another issue, and I'm not going to discount that and push that to the side. It's something that maybe have to look at another point. But
put in here in Baltimore City.
Right. In Baltimore City, the primary source of lead poisoning for young people is old house paint. There are other sources, and you'll see all kinds of consumer reports about, it used to be in gasoline, but they stopped that in the 70s. They eliminated gasoline. But then there's also things like the concern about water, and it's not really in the water, it's in the old
pipes
that had old lead solder in it. But fortunately, here in Baltimore, we don't have hard water or harsh water. It's usually considered soft. So you don't really find it in Baltimore too much. You heard stories about it being in old school water fountains and things like that. But then again, I'm not saying that's good and they should be taken out, but fortunately, the children are drinking out of the fountains are older, because the most susceptible is between birth and 6 years of age. And also, some doctors have indicated you'd need to drink 2-liter bottles of water out of a water fountain for that to be of a concern. But there are also other sources. You've heard about plastic jewelry. You've heard about blinds. Haven't heard anything really about lead filling, sir, but I guess it's possible. But
right.
The primary concern...
It's called the amalgam, and the American Dental Association was started right here in Baltimore. I'm looking at a YouTube video right now. It's called International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology, and several doctors are saying that it does produce lead poisoning in the blood-brain barrier.
Okay.
No, but I'm going to have to jump off Nehemiah, okay? Good morning. The phone number is 410-761-1592. We're trying to keep this narrow focus on the issue of lead poisoning within the residents or residential communities within Baltimore City. And it may not just be specific to Baltimore City, but this is where the focus is, and this is what we are dealing with right now this morning. So the phone number is 410-761-1592. You may have a child out there that's having some difficulty and having some problems, or maybe some problem running into with the criminal justice system because of behavioral problems. We see it within the schools, because they have the problem of water within the schools. I believe we have a problem with water in our residents in this city, and that hasn't been quite addressed just yet. But our focus is on housing, the housing department here in Baltimore City, in the like of caring, the lack of responsiveness of those who are supposed to be in charge of city government, the mayor, the city council, the housing commissioner. So we have to be responsible ourselves to not be quiet and speak up for ourselves so that we can stop this mess that's going on. Scott, there was something that we were talking about during the break that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I wanted to let people know what kind of things they should do if you're in a home, certainly with young children, and you notice flaking and chipping paint in a rental property. The primary thing you should do is notify the landlord, and preferably in writing. I have so many people call me and say, well, I called them, I talked to them, or I saw them face to face and told them about it and showed it to them.
Mm-hmm.
But it really is important if you can put it in writing and keep a copy, because that documents your actual complaint and concern. Then if they don't take care of it, and you should put in there and remind them that you have young children in the house, or even if you don't have young children, or you might have visitors or grandchildren or something like that, you'd want that taken care of. And if they don't respond, the next thing you can do is go to rent escrow and go to your local district court and file a petition for rent escrow saying, look, here's my written letter, I've complained, or if you have a picture of it, and the landlord's not taking care of it. You have to pay your rent. You're obligated to pay your rent. You can't just stop paying rent. But with rent escrow, you're not paying your landlord directly. You're paying it to the court.
That's right.
And they'll hold on to it if they accept your petition. They'll send out an inspector. The inspector won't test for lead, but if they see it, because the existence of flaking and chipping paint alone is a violation of the city code, they could issue a violation notice, and then the landlord would have to take care of that. Ultimately, if for some reason the landlord doesn't take care of it, let's say, hope he does, and then the court will pay him the rent. If he doesn't, the court could pay back some of your rent or could give back all of your rent. But then most likely you will end up having to move out anyway, which if you think of it, if they're not responding to your complaint, that might be a good thing anyway.
But my next question is that who would do the inspecting? The city? The same ones that don't want to pay?
Well, if you're in a housing authority property, you're in a difficult spot, because it's my understanding what happens, another thing we recommend to people who call our office, is you can call 311. That's the non-emergency number in Baltimore City, and say that you're in a rental unit and that you believe there's flaking and chipping paint, or if there's any other serious conditions. I have people who call me with water damage or a flood backup that hasn't been repaired. You call them, say you're in a rental unit, and you'd like to have someone come out and inspect it. They will.
Yes.
Again, that would be the Department of Housing and Community Development. They'll give you a reference number. Someone's supposed to call you within 24 to 48 hours and arrange a time to come out and look. Now, they won't test. Again, they won't test for lead. They won't test for mold, because that's very costly. So, but if they see it, they'll issue a violation notice. The problem is if you're living in a housing authority property, the Department of Housing and Community Development often tell the callers that they're not able to come out and inspect, because they won't, which really puts people in a hard spot. Because if you're with the Housing Authority of Baltimore City, a tenant, you're told to tell the property manager and call maintenance. But as I've heard so many times in my office, people don't come, or they make promises and they just don't show up.
Now, let me ask this question, is that the city doesn't want to pay, but they've been, the mayor toted the arrest of all these city employees that had warrants out for them and all those kind of things, and child support and this and that and the other.
Right, and as I told the mayor, the city council in their hearing, what the housing authority is doing is no different than what they call deadbeat dads.
That's right.
Because if you're not paying your obligations, and I believe the mayor made an effort that she wanted to make sure the image of the city is important, and that you don't really want employees of the city not paying their personal obligations of paying child support. And I believe that was a couple months ago. They arrested a few. Personally, I feel Mr. Graziano's in no different position, because he's not a city employee to that extent. The housing authority's not an employee, but they're not paying up on their obligations, in which they're required to do.
So they're a deadbeat agency.
They're a deadbeat agency because they're just refusing to pay. And this is the result. Just think, to get to a judgment, someone's injured, they go to a lawyer, they file a lawsuit, they have to defend the case, they fight tooth and nail, they put up a defense, they get their experts, they say that you're not injured or it didn't happen, and you've got to fight all that. You go to court, you win, you have to go to jury trial, sit through trial for 5 days. It's very expensive to put on a trial with experts. You win, then they appeal it, and then 2 years after that, they still say, if you win everything and there's a judgment against you, they still won't pay.
But why is it they spending all this money on legal fees? And the legal fees they have paid over the years could have taken care of these
most definitely,
current judgments.
Most definitely, because Mr. Graziano immediately threw out in the press the number of, he has $800 million in claims against him. But those are just claims, and as I pointed out, as a lawyer, we sue obviously for a lot more than
These
we
are
really
judgments.
expect.
These
right.
are judgments.
Well, no, he's saying $800 million they would have to budget for in claims, because when we sue any landlord, we put a number down,
Okay.
A large number down, and a jury could find up to that amount. But in Maryland, there's caps on damages. You can only recover so much. And that in combination with potential economic, it doesn't matter if you have brain injury from lead poisoning, or if you break a leg or you lose an arm, the most you can recover for non-economic damages is capped. It used to be up until 1994, from 86 to 94, $350,000. After 94, it's $500,000 with a $15,000 increment. So for these cases that we're bringing in the early 90s, let's say, the most these kids could recover in non-economic damages is about $350,000.
But let me ask this question. Since they don't want to take it on the front end,
right.
we paying for it on the back burner through the high rate of crime and violence within Baltimore City, which could be a direct correlation or link between lead poisoning and the crime rate that's taking place in Baltimore City.
Sure. I mean, as it's pointed out, the housing authority is there to provide decent, safe, and affordable housing. The money is there. And as we've established through our collection action against, there's hundreds of millions of dollars out there. They're not spending it on the facilities, then we wouldn't have this issue. So as a result of this, children have been exposed. Hundreds of children in housing authority properties. There are studies that have shown, and it's really a cyclical type of thing.
Yes.
Initially, children might be okay in school when they first start out. As the work starts getting harder, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, they just aren't catching on. Comprehension, reading comprehension, understanding, and attention are issues. And so if they're sitting in a classroom and they're not getting it like their peers might be, what's going to happen? They're going to get distracted. They're going to get into trouble. They're going to have behavior issues.
They're going to get put on in Baltimore City Public Schools, Prozac or Ritalin or some other
that
drug.
That could happen too. And
special aid.
So, and then it can be a bad cycle, and then
Yes.
sometimes kids end up in trouble with the law. There's also studies that show that an association between lead levels and impulsivity, not making good judgment calls. I don't want people to use lead as an excuse.
I understand.
Because as I tell my clients who come in with real young children, the ones that I've seen in my history, if they have a good family support, if they have motivation, if they have direction, children can still do well.
Yes.
Doesn't mean they're not injured, but the brain's a remarkable organ. You can compensate, but you're robbed some potential. So maybe the B student could have been an A student.
Correct.
So not to use lead poisoning as a crutch. But for the ones that don't have the support system, don't have the backup, then quite often it falls off. They end up not finishing school, and often, unfortunately, get into trouble.
Yeah, that's
So that's how it's related. I think it's more related to the potential crime than maybe not having the NFL playing. But we won't get into that. That's another story.
You're right about that.
But it's very unfortunate. Certainly during when Kurt Schmoke was the mayor and the
Scattered
city that
housing,
reads,
demolition.
The city that reads. I always thought, man, with all this lead, they
Yes,
can't
sir.
read. It's
Yes,
hard
sir.
to read.
That's right.
It's difficult.
But at that time, another thing, since you brought that up, during the Kurt administration, they was doing scattered housing demolition.
Yes.
They would go into a block and go in it'd be three houses from the corner, you'll tear a house down, and then 4 more doors down, you'll tear another house, and you create all these goals and these holes and gaps within a particular block, and also the possible lead exposure from the dust from these.
Right. Well, I think they were taking precautions. I don't know to what extent, but yes, certainly demolition of an old house will release lead into the immediate environment. But I mean, the other good thing though is it's getting rid of these houses and making sure no one's ever going back in. Because a lot of times with these landlords, they may get issued a violation notice, and the health department only really follows it to while their child is in the house. And the real issue is sometimes people will be notified that a child has lead. By the time the health department gets to the home, they may have moved, which is a good thing. They're out of there. But they had no authority to continue the investigation of that house.
Because the occupant.
Because the occupant had moved out.
That's what I was talking about earlier about
So that
transit.
the house that has already poisoned one child now, who has moved on hopefully to a better environment, is now available for the landlord to rent to someone else.
That's what I was saying when I was talking about West Baltimore, Northwest Baltimore, East Baltimore, these neighborhoods of transit, because you got their high rental areas, and folks don't leave those areas. That's why I was saying generation after generation, folks do not leave those particular areas, so you have generational exposure that's taking place. It still bothers myself and a lot of the people that the city doesn't want to pay.
Yeah, it's very, very bothersome. Indeed, the housing authority carries the city name. It's a slap to the city. Obviously our reputation is very important. Our image, to the success for other businesses and things like that. And it's getting out there. And although it's not the mayor and city council not paying their debts, outsiders don't know that.
That's right.
People from other states see, what, the housing authority of Baltimore City is not paying their liabilities? What's that about? Why do we want to set up business there?
That's right.
And they'll raise other questions. So
will they cover us?
Yeah, will they cover them? So it is a concern, and it needs to be addressed. The money is available. We're not trying to take homes away from people. We're not trying to get them. All these scary words like, oh, we'll be out of business if we pay these. That they will not.
That was sad when I read that. They can't pay these. They're saying that they can't pay these claims because we have these other obligations to be able to maintain what we have now. That goes back to the deadbeat dad thing or the deadbeat government situation.
Right.
We couldn't get away with it, could we?
No, we could not. But they have tools. I mean, they can do
got
bond
lawyers.
issues.
They got lawyers.
That they pay plenty of money. They got bond issues. They do rent parts of their buildings out. For instance, for cell towers, they make income through that. They have ground rent issues. So we're pretty confident. Our firm had to hire outside counsel to be the pit bull, if you will, to really not let them get away with this. And we're trying to collect on behalf of our clients who have legitimate lawful judgments after they've exhausted all their appeals and fought the battle to the end.
So I'm going to try to get someone back on this.
Okay, sure.
The phone number is 410-761-1592. I have Scott and Neville here from the law offices of Peter G. Nichols. Phone number is 244-7005. How you doing so far, Scott?
Doing great.
All right. What about the boss? What about the boss? Okay.
I think she's doing okay, too.
Yes, she is. Yes, she is. So let me take this phone call, please. Good morning. You on the air?
Yes. Good morning. How you doing?
Yes, ma'am.
And good morning to your guests. I just asked him a question. How about the houses that are not owned by a housing authority? How do they go after those landlords? And I don't know. I thought I heard someone talk about the lead that was in the water at the schools.
I did.
That also affects our children too.
Right.
And even in if you're in a private home, not just not public housing, but those landlords that had lead in their homes, and then they also have lead in the water. So how do a person address that issue? Okay. How does the lawyers address those issues? And I will hang up.
No, that's fine. Thank you for the call. Again, I really want to help out on the issue of water in schools. One, children are most susceptible to brain damage and exposure between the ages of birth and 6 years of age. So again, they're in school around 4 or 5. They're not quite as at risk. Two, the amount of water that a child would have to take in through a water fountain would be exorbitant. You don't stand there and drink a 2-liter bottle worth of water out of a fountain. The Baltimore City schools have been on top of closing down those old fountains. The problem is they didn't take them out.
That's
what
right.
happened is that principals who had shut down the water fountains years and years ago then had left the school system. New principals came in. There's new parents. The children moved on. There's new parents now, and they say, why aren't these water fountains working? So they opened them up again. And a couple years ago, I was working with Mr. G.I. Johnson,
Yes,
then the
NAACP.
president, NAACP local chapter. We met with the school board head, and we talked about this, but we really determined that it wasn't a serious problem. It is a potential risk, but very, very slim. So that's the one thing. The lead against landlords, again, is you have, unfortunately, they wait until a child, in fact, has an elevated lead level. The clinic's required to report it to the Baltimore City Health Department. The health department conducts an investigation, shows up at the house, and will test for lead. They have the machinery, the expensive machinery that can do it. And if they find lead, then a violation notice is issued, and they're required to abate the lead. So that's basically the process. So the ways in which to try to resolve that issue. And as I drive through the city, you see more and more, you see replacement windows going in. That's a wonderful thing. You see just the houses being renovated and actually the destruction of housing, and you hope that newer housing gets put up, but that's also favorable because the lead levels are going down overall, and that's a good thing.
Okay, what I'm going to try to do now, since we were within the 5-minute mark of trying to close this program out. Scott, do you have any closing remarks of what people can do who may believe that they have been affected, particularly their children and grandchildren? I know I have a couple of them. I know one of them got to be a lead paint baby for sure.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
You can't put the cart before the horse. Obviously, the general symptoms are learning problems, attention problems, inability to concentrate, attention deficit disorder, and behavior problems. But if you think that if you're not sure if your child had elevated lead levels, you can inquire with your clinic.
Mm-hmm.
Go back and ask them to look, because the levels of action have changed over the years, and if your child had an elevated lead level in the early 1990s, they may not have even told you as the parent because they weren't required to, but now they do. So go back and look. But if you do have a child with lead level over 10 micrograms per deciliter, you can certainly call our office. It's the law offices of Peter T. Nickel at 410-244-7005. And just ask for the lead department, and our staff are there to help you and answer your questions. We may not be able to represent you. There are many people out there that, unfortunately, these landlords are now bankrupt, or they've died, and there's no insurance. But we'll investigate that for you. And if we can recover for you, we're going to try our best. If you own the house, that's different story.
Situation. That's right.
And that was the other thing with the water.
Yes.
Because if they found a child in school with an elevated lead level and they thought it was the water, the first thing they were going to do is go back to the house and test the house. And if their parents own the house that have the lead in it, then they're going to be having to abate the house, and it would be very costly.
That's right.
So again, you have even though this was a long time ago and you may not remember where you lived, hopefully the records will show it, but we can investigate for you. But you have up until right before your child turns 21.
So
Getting sooner to us is better than waiting.
So if you believe that your child has been affected by lead paint, give Scott a call at the offices of Peter. Scott Nevin. He's going to make sure I get this right today. So that's Scott Nevin, law offices of Peter T. Nichols. Lead paint, personal injury, asbestos. Phone number is 410-244-7005. Toll-free number is 1-800-303-4930.
But we're local. We're right here, not far from the Inner Harbor.
So, you've heard the commercial, you've seen the commercial. So if you need some relief and you need some assistance, give that office a call. My phone number is to contact me, Brother Donald, is 443-845-9505 on that bootleg phone that you have, y'all. So we thank you for listening to the program, and I hope that we have said something that you can take into your consideration this morning, and that we can become proactive, opposed to just sitting back and saying, I don't know. You've been given information this morning that can start that process moving for you to be able to find some relief for yourself and for your children, and have this city government and this housing administration to be responsible. Deadbeat government. They say we deadbeat dads. They get you. They send the sheriffs after you, but who's going after them to make sure that they be responsible? That's why we have responsible attorneys like Scott Nevin. So we thank you once again for listening to this program, Stolen Property, every Saturday morning from 11 to 12 noon. From 12 noon. So I thank you for being here, and it's always an opportunity, a great opportunity to be here to be able to do this. But only way I can do this is with your help and with your assistance. So let me get my sponsor in this morning. So wish to thank Supreme Oasis Deli and Bakery, home of the world famous Supreme Bean Pie, 3223 Garrison Boulevard, Baltimore, Maryland, 21216. Delivery is available. Call for details, 410-466-7212. Or you can fax 410-367-1998. That is the fax number. So that's once again Supreme Oasis, the home of the world famous Supreme Bean Pie, where you can get your supreme knowledge, your supreme understanding, your supreme wisdom from people, from clean people who can give you clean food and will clean you up. So we thank you for listening to this program. So we're about to transition, and we are getting on out of here. So see you next week, and thank you for entertaining us this morning. So peace.